It's January 18th, 2026. We are, what, about a year into the second term of the Trump presidency?
Honestly, yeah.
And if you've been following the headlines at all, you know the atmosphere right now just feels incredibly fragile.
Mm?
And we're not talking about tax code adjustments today or, healthcare debates. We are looking at a scenario that is really challenging the fundamental architecture of the Western alliance.
It is.
The focus is Greenland, but the implications are just so much wider.
It really is the stress test that I think geopolitical analysts have been fearing for years. I mean, you have a situation where the president of the United States is threatening a trade war.
And maybe more.
And potentially more kinetic actions against European allies over a territorial dispute.
Hmm.
Based on the stack of reports we have today, and this is mainly from the BBC and some really detailed analysis coming out of that emergency summit in Brussels.
Right.
We are looking at basically a red alert moment for transatlantic relations.
And the mission for this deep dive is to really move past the sensational headlines. We need to understand the mechanics of this crisis. So we're going to unpack the specific catalyst, this troop deployment that went so wrong, and then really drill down into the European response.
And that response is key.
It is. Specifically, I want to get into the technicals of the anti-coercion instrument, which everyone is calling it Europe's trade bazooka.
That instrument is such a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's a legal weapon that, didn't even exist a few years ago.
Exactly. And finally, we have to look at the fracture inside Europe itself, because you have this camp led by Macron.
Right.
And another camp led by Meloni, and they are pushing for completely contradictory strategies. But okay, let's start with the immediate context. This isn't the first time Trump's brought up Greenland.
No, not at all.
He mentioned buying it in his first term, and it was mostly dismissed, right? Like a real estate obsession. Why is it back now in 2026 with this much intensity?
I think it's important to remember that for the U.S. security establishment, Greenland isn't just a big island of ice.
It's strategic.
It's a strategic choke point. It sits right in what they call the GI-UK gap. That's Greenland, Iceland, UK. It's the gateway for Russian submarines trying to get into the Atlantic.
Okay.
So the argument from the White House, which has gotten much harder in this second term, is that you just can't have a NATO ally controlling that space if they're, say, economically vulnerable or can't project force.
So Trump sees it as a weak link.
He sees it as a distressed asset that needs to be under American management for, the sake of collective security.
So this isn't just a whim. There's a calculation here about controlling the Arctic. But the escalation this week, I mean, the sources are calling it the most dangerous turn yet.
Mm-hmm.
What actually triggered this specific flare-up? A few weeks ago, this was just kind of simmering.
The catalyst was a very specific military maneuver. The reports all detail a recent deployment of European troops to Greenland. And that contingent, it explicitly included Danish soldiers.
Right. And reading the analysis on this, it seems like a classic case of just tragic irony. The European intent wasn't to blockade the U.S. or anything, was it?
No, not at all. Quite the opposite. This is the lost in translation part that makes this whole thing so volatile.
Okay.
The expert consensus is that Brussels and Copenhagen, they intended this deployment as a signal of burden sharing. They were trying to say to President Trump, look, we hear your complaints about Europe not doing enough for defense.
We're stepping up.
We are stepping up. We are putting boots on the ground to secure the Arctic flank.
So they thought they were giving him exactly what he wanted. We're securing the perimeter for you.
Exactly. They thought it would placate him. But the reception in Washington was
The opposite.
diametrically opposed to the intention. Trump didn't see allies helping. He saw squatters blocking the deal. He viewed the presence of those soldiers not as a security asset, but as a provocation designed to assert sovereignty and stop the U.S. from taking control.
That is a massive miscalculation.
Yeah.
It's almost diplomatic malpractice to misread the room that badly.
Well, it highlights the decay in the diplomatic channels, right?
Yeah.
And because he saw it as a provocation, the response was immediate, and it was severe. He's now dangling a 10% tariff on European allies.
On specific allies.
Specifically those who are supporting Denmark's position.
Oh.
And it's set to kick in starting in February.
And February is just weeks away. This isn't some long-term negotiation strategy.
No, it's a shot across the bow.
But there's a phrase in the source material that it stopped me cold. We're talking about tariffs, which is economic warfare, sure. But the reports say Trump has not ruled out taking the territory by force.
And that's the word. That's the word that changes the entire calculus.
We have to pause on that.
Yeah.
because force, in this context, it usually implies military force. But we are talking about a NATO ally.
Right.
Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all. If the U.S. threatens force against Denmark, how do you even begin to parse that, legally or strategically?
You can't parse it with the traditional NATO rulebook. That's why the BBC correspondent described this whole thing as a roller coaster ride that's now entering, completely uncharted territory.
It breaks the logic of the alliance.
It creates a paradox.
Yeah.
If the U.S. were to act militarily to secure Greenland, the NATO treaty would theoretically require the U.S. to defend Denmark from the U.S. It breaks everything.
Calls it bluster.
Perhaps, but in international relations, once a threat of force is on the table and it's explicitly not ruled out, you have to treat it as a non-zero probability.
And that uncertainty, that's the leverage. He's betting that Europe is too terrified of that scenario to actually call his bluff.
Precisely. And while that military threat is this huge shadow looming over everything, the economic threat, that's the knife at the throat right now.
Right.
That 10% tariff is concrete and it's on a timer.
Which brings us to Brussels. The description of the emergency summit was so striking. Usually these things are all theater, flags, handshakes, big press conferences. The reports call this one a discreet affair. No road closures, no cameras.
And that silence tells you everything you need to know about the severity of this. When leaders want to send a message to the public, they hold a press conference.
Yeah.
When they are genuinely afraid of an uncontrollable escalation, they meet in secret. They know that a leaky summit or just one misplaced soundbite could tip Trump from threatening tariffs to implementing tariffs.
Or worse. So inside this quiet room, you have this massive strategic split. Let's look at the first camp, which the analysis labels Camp Macron.
Right.
The French president is pushing for the trade bazooka.
Yes. This is the hardline response.
We hear trade bazooka a lot in the press, but I want to get into the weeds of the actual mechanism. This is the anti-coercion instrument, or ACI. And I was looking at the history of this tool. It's pretty new, isn't it?
It is. And understanding the ACI is, I think, crucial to understanding why the stakes are just so high. Historically, the EU has been very, very slow to react to foreign policy threats.
Because it required unanimity.
Exactly. If you wanted to sanction a country, every single member state had to agree, which meant one small country, or maybe one with some side deals with the aggressor, could just veto the whole thing.
Which made Europe an economic giant, but a geopolitical.
A geopolitical worm. Harsh, but yeah, it's accurate. The ACI was designed to fix that. It allows the EU Commission to impose countermeasures, things like tariffs, restricting access to the single market, blocking government contracts.
And it does this using what's called qualified majority voting, QMV.
Right. So one or two dissenters can't stop it. It flips the default settings from inaction to action. If the Commission decides economic coercion is happening, they can pull the trigger unless a massive bloc votes to stop them. It's a weapon built for speed and impact.
And here's the detail that really struck me in the analysis. This weapon. It wasn't built for the United States.
No. And that is the supreme irony of 2026. The ACI was conceptualized and drafted largely in response to China.
I remember that. The incident with Lithuania.
Yeah, it was the test case, exactly. When China blocked Lithuanian exports because of their stance on Taiwan, the EU realized they had no tool to fight back against Beijing's economic bullying. So they built the ACI.
To protect the single market from hostile, authoritarian external powers.
Yes. And they never, ever, in their worst nightmares, imagined the first major test of this bazooka would be pointing it at Washington, D.C.
It effectively recategorizes the U.S. from strategic partner to hostile economic coercer. I mean, that's a label that sticks.
It is, and that's why there's so much hesitation. Macron's argument is that the tool exists, the coercion is clear, and if they don't use it now, they're just signaling that they will submit to bullying. He believes the only language Trump respects is strength.
If you don't fire back, you encourage more aggression.
That's his view. But not everyone buys that logic. Which leads us to the other side of the table, Camp Maloney. The Italian prime minister has a very different read on this whole situation.
Right. Giorgia Meloni is effectively leading the diplomatic camp, the de-escalation camp.
And her position is heavily influenced by her personal rapport with Trump. The reports note she has a better-than-most relationship with him.
Which implies she thinks she can translate European intent better than Macron can.
Exactly. Her argument is rooted in that initial lost-in-translation moment we talked about. She is saying, look, He is escalating because he misunderstood the troops. If we explain that the troops were meant to help, we can walk this back.
She wants to frame it as a communication error, not a geopolitical standoff.
Correct. She views the ACI, the bazooka, as a trap. If Europe fires back with its own tariffs, Trump will almost certainly retaliate with even higher tariffs. And then you're in a trade war spiral that just devastates the European economy, which is already pretty fragile.
So she's pleading for time.
Time to talk him down, yes.
It's this classic good cop, bad cop dynamic, except they aren't working together. They're fighting over who gets to hold the megaphone.
Right.
And the risks here are, they're huge.
Yeah.
Let's map out the damned if you do, damned if you don't scenarios that the briefing describes.
Well, scenario A is the Macron path. You use the ACI. Best case, Trump backs down. Worst case, he doubles down. Maybe he pulls security guarantees. Maybe he hits the EU with 25% tariffs. The economic damage would be immediate.
Okay, and scenario B is the Maloney path.
Yeah.
You talk. You don't impose counter tariffs.
The risk there, according to the analysis, is that Trump concludes the bloc of 27 nations is weak, divided, and too scared.
And if he smells fear.
He might decide that taking Greenland, even by force, is a viable option because he thinks Europe won't actually do anything to stop him.
So weakness invites aggression, but strength risks escalation. It's a terrible menu of options.
It is, and that is exactly why the summit ended without a unified public statement. They are paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice.
We should look beyond just France and Italy, though. I mean, this involves Denmark most directly. The Danish prime minister wasn't mincing words.
No, the quote was stark. Europe won't be blackmailed. That's a flat-out rejection of the premise that territory can be traded for tariff relief.
And we also saw comments from John Swinney. What was his angle?
He was reinforcing the normative argument. He said tariffs shouldn't be used as a bargaining chip between partners.
A callback to the old rules.
A callback to the old rules of the alliance, yeah. That we don't hold each other's economies hostage. But as we've seen, those old rules might not apply in 2026.
There's another layer to this, too, which is the domestic situation in the U.S. Foreign policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. The sources mention Trump's facing some headwinds at home.
Yes, and this is critical context. The reports mention that while Hispanic voters were a key part of the coalition that sent him back to the White House, there is, and I'm quoting, souring sentiment regarding the economy in that demographic.
So the honeymoon period of the second term is definitely over.
Precisely. Inflation, cost of living, the usual suspects. And when a leader faces domestic discontent, a foreign policy crisis can sometimes serve as a rally around the flag moment. Or, conversely, the need for an economic win like securing resources in Greenland or protecting American jobs via tariffs, it just becomes more urgent. He can't afford to look weak abroad if he's polling weakly at home.
Which makes him more unpredictable, not less.
It just adds volatility to an already volatile mix.
I want to zoom out to the macro view. We've covered the what and the how, but so what here feels existential.
Yeah.
The source material uses a metaphor about a bridge.
The transatlantic diplomatic drawbridge.
Right. The idea that Trump isn't just pulling it up, isolating the U.S., but that he's threatening to blow it up altogether.
That metaphor really captures the structural damage being done here. An alliance is based on two things: shared interests and trust. The shared interests defense against Russia or China are, theoretically still there. But the trust. If the U.S. is threatening to annex territory from an ally and tax their economy, the trust is just evaporating.
And without trust, NATO is just a piece of paper.
It's just a piece of paper. And if Europe responds by treating the U.S. as a hostile economic combatant with the ACI, you are institutionalizing that distrust. You're building a legal framework for rivalry.
So we're recording this in mid-January. The tariffs are set for February. Is there any indication from the sources that a breakthrough is imminent? Or are we just watching the clock tick down?
The analysis is, it's pretty pessimistic about a swift resolution. The split between the Macron and Maloney camps is deep. It's philosophical. It's not just about tactics. It's about how they view the world.
Right.
One sees a world of power politics where you have to fight. The other sees a world of relationships that can be managed. Bridging that gap takes time, and time is the one luxury they do not have.
It feels like we're watching a slow-motion car crash where the passengers are arguing over who should grab the wheel.
That's a very apt visual. And you have to remember the ambiguity itself is dangerous. The longer Europe hesitates, the more it reinforces the narrative in Washington that the EU is just a bureaucratic mess that can be pushed around.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize all of this for the listener.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of moving parts.
All right, let's boil it down.
We have a catalyst. European troops deployed to Greenland. intended to help, but viewed by Trump as a blockade.
Check.
We have the threat, a 10% tariff on European allies starting in February, and the explicit refusal to rule out military force to secure Greenland.
Which is the escalation that changes everything.
We have the weapon, the EU's anti-coercion instrument, a trade bazooka designed for China, now potentially being aimed at the U.S. to inflict economic pain.
A weapon that risks a full-blown trade war.
And finally, we have the dilemma, the split between fighting back, which is the Macron camp, and trying to de-escalate through diplomacy, the Meloni camp, with the clock just ticking down to an economic explosion in February.
That is the state of play. It is a moment where the entire post-World War II order is being stress-tested to the point of fracture.
You know, throughout this entire deep dive, I keep coming back to that one specific detail about the anti-coercion instrument, the fact that it was built for hostile external powers.
It really is the lingering thought from all this, isn't it?
If the EU decides to use it, if they actually pull that trigger against the United States, I want you, listening, to really consider what that means. Can the label of ally even survive that action?
It's the ultimate question. If you use a weapon that was designed for enemies on your partner, are they still your partner? Or does that moment officially mark the shift where the U.S. and Europe become hostile economic rivals?
Well, once you cross that line, I'm not sure there is a way to go back.
I don't think there is.
We will have to watch what happens in February very, very closely. This is one of those months that history books might devote a whole chapter to.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's a heavy topic, but understanding the mechanics makes the headlines a lot less confusing, even if they stay alarming. We'll be back with another deep dive soon. Stay curious.